It was a night like no other, a night I would never forget. The campfire crackled and hissed, casting eerie, dancing shadows upon the towering pine trees that surrounded our campsite. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the chilling breeze whispered secrets through the forest, as if the woods themselves held their breath, waiting for my tale. My friends and I had ventured deep into the heart of the wilderness for a weekend of camping, far from the reach of cell phones and civilization. We were intrepid souls, seeking adventure and a break from the monotony of daily life. Little did we know that this journey would take us into the realm of the supernatural. As the night grew darker and colder, we huddled around the campfire, our faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The forest was silent, save for the occasional distant hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves in the wind. Our flashlights cast long, eerie beams of light, reaching into the impenetrable darkness that lay beyond the ring of firelight. The atmosphere was perfect for ghost stories, and we eagerly took turns spinning tales of horror. Each story was darker and more unsettling than the last, and it was as if the night itself conspired to add an air of dread to our narratives. Then it was my turn, and I began to weave a tale of the forest itself. I spoke of a legend that had been passed down through generations of the indigenous people who once inhabited these woods. They spoke of a malevolent spirit, an ancient and vengeful entity that dwelled in the very heart of this forest. This spirit, they said, had the power to take on the forms of animals and trees, to whisper in the wind, and to cast its sinister influence over the minds of those who entered its domain. The locals spoke of strange occurrences, of lost hikers and unexplainable phenomena. They called it the Woodsman, and they said that those who spoke its name would invoke its wrath. My friends listened with rapt attention, but their faces had grown paler as I continued the story. The fire crackled and seemed to burn even brighter, as if it too was trying to keep the encroaching darkness at bay. We laughed off my story as a chilling piece of fiction, the product of a creative mind seeking to spook our companions. We reassured each other that there were no malevolent spirits lurking in the forest, and the tale of the Woodsman was nothing more than folklore. As the night wore on, we decided to venture deeper into the woods, determined to experience the full extent of the wilderness that surrounded us. Armed with flashlights, we made our way along a narrow trail, the dense forest closing in around us. The towering trees blocked out the moon and stars, casting an impenetrable blackness overhead. As we walked, we heard a rustling in the underbrush and a low, guttural growl. We stopped in our tracks, our flashlights darting in every direction, searching for the source of the noise. The growl came again, closer this time, and it was not the sound of any animal we could identify. Our unease grew as the growl continued, surrounding us from all sides. The forest seemed to come to life with an otherworldly presence. The tension was palpable, and we could feel eyes upon us, unseen but ever watchful. Then, from the darkness emerged a figure, a shadowy silhouette that moved with an unnatural, fluid grace. The figure appeared to shift and contort, its shape taking on the form of a massive wolf. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, and its growls took on an eerie, almost human quality. We knew that this was no ordinary wolf, no natural creature of the forest. It was as if my story of the Woodsman had summoned a malevolent force from the depths of the wilderness. Panic set in, and we turned to flee, but the forest had other plans. The trail we had followed seemed to vanish before our eyes, the trees closing in around us, trapping us in a nightmarish labyrinth. The wind whispered with an unsettling and unnatural voice, and the howling of the wolf creature grew louder, closer. We stumbled through the woods, our flashlights flickering and failing, our sense of direction lost in the dense, shifting darkness. The howling was all around us, and it seemed to come from every direction, as if the very woods themselves were crying out. With a sense of mounting terror, we realized that we were no longer in control of our journey. It was as if the forest had claimed us, leading us deeper into its sinister embrace. We were lost, and the malevolent force that had appeared before us continued to draw near. As we desperately tried to find our way back to the campsite, we reached a small clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient and dilapidated cabin, its time-worn wooden boards creaking in the wind. It seemed like our only refuge in this nightmarish forest, and we rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The cabin was shrouded in darkness, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. The dim light from our flashlights revealed decaying furniture and eerie symbols etched into the walls. The room seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, and the shadows danced on the walls as if they had a life of their own. We locked the cabin's door, seeking shelter from the malevolent force that lurked outside. Fear gnawed at us as we realized that we were not alone in the cabin. In the dim light, we saw a figure in the corner of the room. Its shape shifted and contorted, and it seemed to move with an unnatural fluidity. It was as if the entity that had appeared in the woods had followed us into the cabin. The figure let out an unearthly howl, its voice a chilling and mournful cry that sent shivers down our spines. The air in the cabin seemed to vibrate with an unsettling energy, and we could feel the malevolence closing in around us. With a sense of mounting dread, we tried to flee the cabin, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if an otherworldly force was holding it fast. The figure drew closer, its presence radiating an unnatural malevolence. As we huddled together, the room grew colder and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist. The figure lunged at us, and the world around us seemed to warp and twist. The cabin itself transformed into a nightmarish scene, filled with grotesque and terrifying visions. We could hear the whispers of tormented souls, their voices a chorus of despair. Just as we felt the darkness closing in, the cabin's door burst open, and we were pulled out into the night. Our saviors were a group of locals who had heard the commotion and come to investigate. They fended off the sinister figure, and it vanished into the night. We made our way back to the campsite, the experience having left us shaken and scarred. It was a chilling reminder that the wilderness could hide secrets beyond our comprehension, and that the line between reality and the supernatural was thinner than we had ever imagined. As we sat around the campfire once more, our faces illuminated by the crackling flames, we couldn't help but wonder if my story of the woodsman had somehow drawn the malevolent force to us. The forest held its secrets, and that night it had shared them with us in the most terrifying of ways. I often found solace in the late-night subway rides home after a grueling day at work. The city's bustling streets gave way to the desolate underground, and I could finally unwind in the quiet hum of the train. But one fateful night, my peaceful routine took a terrifying turn that would forever haunt my memories. It was well past midnight when I left the office, my shoulders heavy with the weight of a long day. The subway station was nearly empty, the only signs of life being a few other late-night commuters scattered about the platform. The echoing sounds of a distant train signaled that my ride home was imminent. As the train pulled into the station, I stepped on board and took a seat by the window, the familiar rhythm of the wheels on the tracks lulling me into a sense of relaxation. The car was dimly lit, with the only illumination coming from the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional glimpses of the dark tunnel outside. As the train rolled through the underground maze, I watched the stations pass by, their names illuminated on the walls. But the train made fewer stops at this hour, and soon I found myself in a near-empty carriage, my only company a few passengers who had dozed off in their seats. I stared out the window, my reflection framed by the inky darkness outside. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks became hypnotic, and I was on the verge of drifting off to sleep myself. That's when I heard it, an eerie, almost musical hum that cut through the train's monotonous sounds. I jolted awake, my eyes scanning the empty car. The humming continued, growing louder, and I realized it was coming from the far end of the carriage. I squinted in the dim light, my heart pounding in my chest. At the other end, there was a lone figure huddled in the corner seat. The hood of their oversized jacket was pulled low, obscuring their face. It was as if they were lost in their own world, completely indifferent to my presence. I tried to convince myself that there was nothing to fear, that this person was just another passenger. But the haunting tune that emanated from them was unlike any I had ever heard. It was as if they were singing an otherworldly melody, and the words, though whispered, sent shivers down my spine. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to ignore the inexplicable unease that had settled in my stomach. The figure continued to hum, their tune growing more dissonant, more unsettling, with each passing moment. I looked around, hoping to find some reassurance from the other passengers, but they remained in their slumbering state, completely oblivious to the eerie presence in the corner. I was the only one who seemed to be affected by the haunting melody. As the subway car rumbled through the dark tunnel, the figure's humming grew louder, and I could feel their eyes on me. The hooded head turned in my direction, revealing a face shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out their features, but I could feel the intensity of their gaze, a gaze that bore into me with a malevolence that sent fear coursing through my veins. The melody they sang seemed to grow more sinister, more otherworldly, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from their shadowed face. In that moment, I realized that I was trapped in a nightmare. The subway car had become a twisted, eerie place, and I was at the mercy of an entity whose intentions were unfathomable. I desperately searched for an escape. The train was still moving, the next station a distant speck of light in the tunnel. I considered moving to a different car, but fear rooted me to my seat. The humming figure was only a few feet away, and the thought of passing by them was paralyzing. As the train drew closer to the next station, the figure abruptly stopped their haunting melody and stood up. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows throughout the car. The figure took a step toward me, their hooded head tilting to the side, as if they were studying me. Their voice, cold and ethereal, whispered in my ear. "You are not alone in the dark, dear traveler." With that, the figure reached into their pocket and pulled out an object. In the dim light, I could barely make out what it was, but it gleamed with an unsettling, unnatural light. The train screeched to a halt as it reached the station, and the platform lights flooded the car, revealing the figure's face in all its horrifying glory. Their eyes were empty sockets, and their ghastly grin revealed rows of jagged, serrated teeth. I screamed, my voice drowning in the cacophony of the station. The figure lunged toward me, the eerie glow of the object in their hand growing blindingly bright. But just as they reached me, the doors to the subway car closed, and the train roared to life, pulling away from the station. I watched in terror as the figure disappeared into the distance, their sinister gaze never leaving mine. My heart pounded as the train continued its journey through the dark underground, and I knew that the horror I had encountered was far from over. The figure had warned me that I was not alone in the dark, and in that haunting moment, I realized that the city's subway held secrets that were beyond comprehension. I couldn't escape the paralyzing fear that had taken hold of me, and as I rode deeper into the tunnel, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden in the shadows, waiting for unsuspecting passengers like me. As I sit here in the dimly lit room, I can't help but replay the events of that fateful night in my mind. The memory of it still sends shivers down my spine, and I'm haunted by the knowledge that the line between reality and the unknown can blur in the most terrifying ways. It all began on a cold winter evening. I had just moved into a quaint old cottage nestled in the woods. The place had a rustic charm, but it also had an eerie quality to it. The landlord had mentioned that it had stood there for generations, and its history was shrouded in secrets. The first few weeks in the cottage were uneventful. I settled in, decorated the place, and enjoyed the solitude that the forest offered. But soon, strange occurrences began to unfold, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. It started with subtle things, like the creaking of floorboards in the dead of night when I was sure I was alone. Whispers of a voice I couldn't quite understand echoed through the walls. I blamed it on the old, settling wood, or perhaps the wind whispering through the trees outside. But as the days turned into weeks, the disturbances became more pronounced. Objects would vanish, only to reappear in the most unexpected places. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, and the whispers grew more distinct, as if someone were trying to communicate. One particularly chilling night, I was jolted awake by a sensation of someone's presence in the room. The air grew icy cold, and I could see my breath. The room was shrouded in darkness, but there was a faint, eerie glow coming from the corner. I squinted my eyes and realized it was a figure, a silhouette that seemed to be made of mist. It was vaguely human in shape, but its features were indistinct, as if it were trying to take form. The whispers in the room grew louder, and I could finally make out words, though they were spoken in a language I couldn't comprehend. My heart raced as I watched the figure draw closer. It reached out a hand, and I could see that it was translucent, its fingers ending in wispy tendrils. As the figure extended its hand toward me, I could feel the chill in the air intensify, and I knew I was in the presence of something otherworldly. With all the strength I could muster, I turned on the bedside lamp. The room flooded with light, and the figure dissipated like smoke, leaving only a lingering sense of dread in its wake. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The cottage was haunted, and I was not alone. I began to research the history of the place, and what I found sent a shiver down my spine. The cottage had once belonged to a family that had met a tragic end in a fire that had consumed the building. The whispers in the walls seemed to be the echoes of their voices, trapped in the afterlife. I reached out to a local historian, hoping to gain more insight into the history of the cottage. He confirmed what I had discovered and shared tales of strange occurrences that had been reported by previous tenants. The figure I had encountered was believed to be the spirit of the youngest child of the family who had perished in the fire. Desperate to find a way to put the spirit to rest, I sought the help of a paranormal investigator. The investigator conducted a series of rituals and seances to communicate with the spirit. The sessions were tense, with the room growing cold and eerie voices speaking through the medium. As the investigator attempted to make contact with the spirit, a chilling revelation emerged. The spirit of the child was not alone. There was another presence in the cottage, one that was far more malevolent and powerful. It had been manipulating the child's spirit, keeping it trapped and preventing it from moving on. The investigator concluded that the malevolent presence was a dark entity, something beyond a typical haunting. It was a force that fed on the fear and suffering of the living and the trapped spirits. With the investigator's guidance, we conducted a cleansing ritual to banish the malevolent entity. It was a harrowing experience, the room filled with a malevolent energy that resisted our efforts. But in the end, the dark presence was expelled and the cottage fell silent. The child's spirit was finally at peace and able to move on to the afterlife. The whispers in the walls ceased and the cottage regained a sense of tranquility. As I sit in the room, bathed in the soft glow of the lamp, I can't help but feel a sense of relief. The haunting is over, and the cottage is no longer a place of fear. But the memory of that malevolent presence and the chilling encounter with the child's spirit will stay with me forever. I've come to realize that the line between reality and the supernatural is much thinner than we think. There are forces in this world that we cannot explain, and they can seep into our lives in the most unexpected ways. The cottage in the woods will forever be a reminder that the unknown can be more terrifying than anything we can imagine. Late one chilly, moonless night, I found myself behind the counter of a nearly deserted convenience store, the only employee on the graveyard shift. The store sat at the edge of a small, sleepy town, and in those lonely hours it felt as if the entire world had drifted off to sleep. The store was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights overhead casting eerie shadows that danced along the rows of chips, candy, and dusty cans of soup. The low hum of refrigerated drinks and the occasional buzz of the electric sign outside were the only sounds that broke the silence. As I leaned on the counter, lost in thought and counting down the hours until my shift's end, I saw a flicker of movement at the entrance. The door's bell jingled softly and a figure stepped inside. My eyes locked onto the newcomer, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. The person who entered the store was dressed in a long hooded coat that seemed far too heavy for the season. The hood was pulled low, casting their face in deep shadow. Their steps were slow and deliberate, their gait almost unnatural. It was as if they were in no hurry, as if they had all the time in the world. I greeted them with a nervous smile, trying to hide my unease. "Welcome to the store. Is there anything I can help you find?" The figure didn't respond. They moved slowly down the aisles, their hooded head turning this way and that, as if they were examining the contents of the store with a strange curiosity. I watched as they reached the end of an aisle, paused for a moment, and then continued on. As they moved, I couldn't help but notice how the overhead lights seemed to flicker and dim in their presence. It was subtle, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was just a faulty bulb, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. I continued to watch as the figure made their way to the back of the store, where the refrigerated section was. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, the dim glow from the fridge casting an eerie pallor on their hooded face. I couldn't see their features, but I could sense that they were studying the rows of drinks with an almost obsessive attention to detail. I cleared my throat, trying to gather the courage to speak. "Can I help you find something? Are you looking for a specific drink?" The figure finally turned their head to look at me. Their face remained in shadow, but their eyes gleamed with an eerie, unnatural light. It was as if they were staring right through me, and a chill ran down my spine. "Water," they said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. It was a voice that sent a shiver down my spine, a voice that seemed to carry a weight of sadness and despair. I pointed to the row of bottled water in the fridge. "The water is right there," I said, my voice shaking. The figure reached out a hand, their fingers long and bony, and took a bottle of water. They moved towards the counter, and I couldn't help but notice that their steps were almost soundless. It was as if they were gliding across the floor. As they approached, I could see their hand trembling, their fingers clutching the bottle of water with an almost desperate grip. It was as if they were parched, as if they had been wandering through the desert for days. I scanned the barcode on the bottle and told them the total. The figure reached into their coat and pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. They handed me the money, their eyes never leaving mine. I fumbled with the change and handed it back to them, my heart racing with unease. The figure took the change and the bottle of water, their fingers brushing against mine. The touch sent a jolt of ice-cold fear through me, and I couldn't help but recoil. "Thank you," they whispered, their voice almost lost in the stillness of the store. Then, with a slow, deliberate turn, they made their way to the exit. The door's bell jingled softly as they left, and the store fell back into a heavy silence. I watched as the figure disappeared into the night, their long hooded coat trailing behind them like a ghostly shroud. As they stepped out of the store, the overhead lights flickered once more, and then everything returned to normal. I stood there, my heart pounding, my mind racing with questions. Who was that mysterious person? And what had brought them to the store at such a late hour? The encounter had left me with an unshakable sense of dread, as if I had come face to face with something beyond the realm of the ordinary. Hours passed, and I continued to watch the door, half expecting the figure to return. But they never did. The night dragged on, and the quiet of the store settled in around me. As the first rays of dawn began to break through the darkness, I finally allowed myself to relax. The figure had been unsettling, yes, but it was just a strange encounter in the dead of night. I told myself that it was nothing more than that, a fleeting moment of unease in an otherwise ordinary life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something inexplicable, something that defied reason and logic. The memory of the figure with the hooded coat and the eerie glowing eyes would stay with me, a reminder that the world is full of mysteries that we can never truly understand. After a long, exhausting shift at the hospital, I found myself walking home in the dead of night. The city had an eerie stillness, and the dim streetlights cast long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch and twist as I passed. The few people I encountered hurriedly made their way, their footsteps echoing in the silence. I had always been cautious when it came to walking home alone at night, but that evening, something felt different. It was as if a heavy shroud of dread had settled upon the city, making the familiar streets feel strange and unsettling. As I walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, my nerves on edge. The sensation of being watched had settled in the pit of my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The streets were nearly empty, and the few distant sounds of life were barely discernible. The hospital scrubs clung to me, and the cold night air cut through them, sending shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing louder in the desolate streets. As I turned the corner onto a quieter, dimly lit street, I saw a shadowy figure in the distance. It was far off, but it stood still, illuminated by the flickering streetlight at the end of the block. I felt a pang of unease, but I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Perhaps it was just a late-night pedestrian like me, making their way home. I couldn't let my imagination get the best of me, but as I continued walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was drawing closer. It seemed to move in the periphery of my vision, always at the edge of sight. The shroud of dread thickened, and I could feel the weight of its presence settling in around me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The streets seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. I could hear the figure's footsteps, slow and deliberate, as they echoed through the empty street. Desperation settled in, and I knew I had to make a decision. I could continue on my path home, hoping that the figure was just a stranger on the same route. Or I could turn into a nearby convenience store, seek help, and call the police. My fear overcame my pride, and I veered into the store, my breath quick and shallow. The store was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the rows of snacks and drinks. The lone cashier behind the counter looked up as I entered, a mixture of concern and curiosity in their eyes. I approached the cashier, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sorry to bother you, but there's someone following me outside. I'm a little scared. Is it okay if I stay in here for a bit?" The cashier nodded, their expression understanding. "Of course, you can stay as long as you need. We can call the police if you want." I took a seat in the far corner of the store, my eyes fixed on the entrance. I could feel the weight of the figure's presence, a chilling force that seemed to seep through the walls. Minutes passed, and I watched as the cashier made a call to the police. They assured me that help was on the way, and I felt a flicker of relief. The figure outside had yet to make an appearance, and I hoped that they had given up and moved on. But as I looked out the store's window, I saw the figure step into the dim glow of the streetlight. They were closer now, and I could see their silhouette, a tall, slender figure with an unsettling, deliberate gait. My heart raced, and I tried to keep my composure. The cashier glanced at the figure and then back at me, their expression growing more concerned. They offered me the phone, but I declined, not wanting to make any noise that might alert the stalker. As the figure reached the store's entrance, they stood still for a moment, their shadowy form cast in stark relief against the dimly lit street. I could see that their face was obscured by a hood, and their features were hidden in the darkness. The cashier spoke to them, a note of authority in their voice. "Can I help you with something?" The figure did not respond. They simply stood there, their presence sending a shiver down my spine. The cashier moved closer, their concern turning to annoyance. "Look, if you're not here to buy anything, you need to leave. We've called the police." The figure finally spoke, their voice a chilling whisper. "I'm not here for them. I'm here for you." My heart leaped into my throat as the figure turned towards me. Their eyes gleamed with an eerie, malevolent light, and I could feel the weight of their gaze, a gaze that seemed to pierce right through me. I couldn't move. Fear held me in its icy grip, and I could do nothing but watch as the figure reached into their coat and pulled out a long, slender object. The cashier, sensing the imminent danger, stepped back, their eyes widening in terror. But it was too late. The figure lunged forward, and a sickening sound filled the air. In the dimly lit store, I watched as the figure approached me, their eyes still fixed on mine. I could feel the weight of their presence, an unsettling malevolence that seemed to seep into my very soul. And then, just as they reached me, the police arrived, their sirens blaring, and the figure vanished into the shadows. The police took my statement and searched the area, but they found no trace of the mysterious stalker. I returned home that night, my mind reeling from the encounter, unable to shake the chilling feeling that the figure was still out there, lurking in the darkness. The fear of being watched, of being stalked, never truly left me. The memory of that night haunted my every step, a reminder that the line between safety and danger is thin, and the unknown can lurk in the darkest corners of our world. Thanks for watching. Don't miss out on more spine-chilling tales. Subscribe now for weekly scares. Hit that red button and join our journey into the unknown.